The late autumn wind swept across the hills of Blackwood, Pennsylvania, carrying with it the scent of decay and the whispers of forgotten history. Eleanor Hayes pulled her rental car to the side of the narrow road, consulting the weathered map spread across her lap. The small town hadn't warranted inclusion on any GPS system, existing only as a footnote in county records and in the nightmares of those who remembered its darkest chapter. As a journalist for the Historical Inquirer, Eleanor had built her reputation on uncovering America's buried secrets. But the Vexley case had consumed her thoughts since she'd discovered a yellowed newspaper clipping in her late grandmother's attic. The headline, "Vexley Graves Found Empty," had been enough to set her on this path. The town of Blackwood appeared before her as she crested the hill. A collection of Victorian buildings and clapboard houses nestled in a valley that seemed perpetually shrouded in mist. The church steeple pierced the grey sky like an accusatory finger, its bell tower silent for decades, according to her research. "You won't find much worth writing about here," the elderly attendant at the gas station on the outskirts of town had warned her. "Some stories are best left buried, even if the bodies ain't." Eleanor checked into the only accommodation in town, a boarding house run by Martha Caldwell, a stern-faced woman in her 70s whose family had lived in Blackwood for generations. "3 nights, you said?" Martha asked, sliding a heavy iron key across the reception desk. "Most visitors don't stay past 1. "I'm researching the Vexley family," Eleanor replied, watching carefully for the woman's reaction. Martha's hand trembled slightly, but her expression remained impassive. "Rooms at the top of the stairs, breakfast at 7, we lock the doors at sundown. No exceptions." Eleanor's room was sparse but clean, with floral wallpaper that had faded to the color of old bones. From her window, she could see the cemetery on the hill, its wrought iron gates gleaming dully in the fading light. Somewhere within those grounds lay the empty graves that had drawn her here. She unpacked her equipment, laptop, recorder, camera, and pinned her research to the wall. Census records, property deeds, newspaper clippings, and a single photograph of the Vexley family taken in 1878. They stood stiffly before their grand house, 7 figures in black: Thaddeus and Constance Vexley, their 4 children, and an elderly woman Eleanor presumed was Thaddeus's mother. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved about the room. As dusk fell, Eleanor heard the distinct sound of locks engaging throughout the house. She tried her door, locked from the outside. A wave of claustrophobia washed over her, followed by indignation. She was about to call out when she noticed a folded note that had been slipped under her door. "They still walk after sundown. Stay inside. Stay quiet. They remember their names." The next morning, Eleanor found the town library, a small brick building with windows like narrowed eyes. The librarian, a young man named James Porter, seemed surprised to see an outsider. "The Vexleys?" he repeated when she stated her research interest. "County records are in the back room. Nobody's asked about them in years." The archives were extensive but disorganized. Eleanor spent hours sifting through documents, piecing together the Vexley history. Thaddeus Vexley had arrived in Blackwood in 1865, shortly after the Civil War, with a fortune of mysterious origin. He'd built the grand house on the hill, married Constance Blackwood, daughter of the town's founder, and quickly established himself as a pillar of the community. But something had changed in the winter of 1879. A journal entry from the town doctor caught her attention. Called to the Vexley house again. The youngest boy, Timothy, exhibits the same symptoms as the others. Fever, delirium, speaking in what Thaddeus insists is Latin, though it sounds like no Latin I've ever heard. Constance refuses to leave the cellar. The smell from that place, like meat left too long in summer heat. Thaddeus claims it's a family illness, but I've never seen its like. As Eleanor copied the passage, she felt James watching her from the doorway. "You should talk to old man Harker," he said quietly. "He was there when they dug up the graves in 72. Lives out by the old mill now. Will he speak to me?" James's expression darkened. He might, but only during daylight. And whatever you do, don't mention the book. What book? But James had already turned away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. That evening, as Eleanor returned to the boarding house, she noticed the townspeople hurrying indoors. Doors slammed, curtains drew closed, and within minutes the streets were deserted. From her locked room, she watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty town. And then she saw it, a figure standing motionless at the cemetery gates. Even from this distance, Eleanor could make out the distinctive silhouette of a woman in Victorian dress, her form somehow darker than the gathering night around her. Eleanor reached for her camera, but as she did, the figure's head snapped up as if sensing her gaze. Though impossible at this distance, Eleanor could have sworn those eyes, hollow and hungry, were looking directly at her. The figure raised one arm, pointing toward the boarding house, toward Eleanor's window, and then, with a movement too fluid to be natural, it began to walk down the hill toward town. Eleanor backed away from the window, heart pounding. From somewhere in the house below, she heard Martha Caldwell's voice, low and urgent, reciting what sounded like a prayer. As darkness enveloped Blackwood completely, Eleanor heard a soft scratching at the front door of the boarding house. Then another at the window downstairs, then another and another. By morning, the scratches on the boarding house door were visible, deep grooves in the wood that Martha quietly painted over without comment or explanation. Eleanor knew she was getting close to something the town of Blackwood had been hiding for nearly a century, something that had left 7 graves empty and an entire town living in fear of the dark. The mill stood like a broken tooth at the edge of town, its water wheel long since rotted away, leaving only a skeletal frame that creaked in the morning breeze. Eleanor approached cautiously, camera in hand, documenting the crumbling structure that had once been the economic heart of Blackwood. Ezekiel Harker lived in what had been the mill manager's cottage, a stone building partially reclaimed by ivy and neglect. At 93, he was the oldest resident of Blackwood and, according to James, the last living person who had witnessed the exhumation of the Vexley graves in 1972. The old man was waiting for her on the porch, as if he'd known she was coming, his eyes, clouded with cataracts, fixed on a point somewhere beyond her left shoulder. "You're here about them," he said. Not a question. "The Vexley family, yes," Eleanor confirmed, setting up her recorder with his permission. "I understand you were present when their graves were opened." Harker's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Present? Girl, I was the one who insisted they check those graves. Nobody wanted to. Town council said it was desecration. But I knew. I'd seen them." "Seen who, Mr. Harker?" "All 7 of them, walking after dark, year after year. My father saw them too, and his father before him." His gnarled fingers gripped the arms of his rocking chair. "They've been walking since 1879. Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened in 1879? "The winter that year was cruel, livestock dying. Crops failed the summer before. People were hungry, desperate." Harker's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's when Thaddeus started holding his special services, Sunday nights after regular church, by invitation only." "What kind of services?" "The kind that asks for sacrifice before blessing." Harker's eyes suddenly focused, sharp and clear, meeting Eleanor's gaze. "My grandfather was the church sexton. He cleaned up after one of those services, found blood on the altar cloth. Too much to be from any communion." Eleanor felt a chill despite the morning sun. "And then the family disappeared?" "Not right away. First came the sickness. Children speaking in tongues, animals born wrong, too many legs, eyes in the wrong places. The Vexley children stopped coming to school. Constance wasn't seen for weeks. Then one morning, smoke from the chimney of the Vexley house stopped. When the sheriff finally broke down the door, the house was empty. No signs of struggle, dinner still on the table, gone cold. But there was a funeral." Harker nodded slowly. "Closed caskets, Heavy ones, they said. Thaddeus's brother came from Boston to arrange it. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted to. And in 1972, church needed repairs. Foundation was sinking on the north side, right where the Vexley plot was. I was on the council then, told them we should move the graves proper, not just build around them. His voice quavered. They found all 7 coffins, all sealed, all empty, not a bone, not a button, not a hair. Could they have been moved? Soil was undisturbed beneath, no way in, no way out. Harker leaned forward, his breath smelling of tobacco and decay. But that wasn't the worst of it. Eleanor waited, the recorder capturing the heavy silence. The insides of those coffin lids, all 7, were scored with scratch marks, like someone trying to claw their way out. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. You think they were buried alive? I think, Harker said carefully, they weren't buried at all, not properly. And I think whatever Thaddeus Vexley brought to this town is still here, still hungry. As Eleanor was about to ask another question, a church bell rang in the distance, the first time she'd heard it since arriving. Harker stiffened. You need to go now, he said urgently. That's the warning bell, storm coming. The sky above was clear blue, without a cloud in sight. Mr. Harker, just one more question. You mentioned a book earlier. I mentioned no book, he snapped, suddenly agitated. And if you're smart, neither will you. He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. Listen to me. The Vexleys found something in those hills. Something old. They wrote it all down. If you go looking for that book, they'll know. They always know when someone's close to the truth. As Eleanor walked back to town, the bell continued its solitary toll. The townspeople were closing their shops, bringing in laundry from lines, hurrying children indoors, all under clear skies. At the local diner, the only place still open, Eleanor found James nursing a coffee. Storm coming? She asked, sliding into the booth across from him. That's what they always say, he replied, his voice low. Been saying it for generations. Moo. But there's no storm, isn't there? He nodded toward the window. Outside, the streets were deserted, though the sun still shone. In Blackwood, the storms come after dark. Eleanor placed her recorder on the table. Tell me about the book Harker wouldn't mention. James glanced nervously at the diner's other occupants. Not here. Meet me at the church in an hour. I have cemetery duty today. I can show you something. The church of St. Bartholomew stood on the highest point in town, its shadow stretching across the cemetery like a sundial, marking the hours until darkness. Eleanor found James by the wrought iron gates, a ring of keys in his hand. My family has been taking care of this place for generations, he explained as he unlocked the gate. Porter men have always been the sextons here, like Harker's grandfather, Eleanor noted. James nodded grimly. My great-great-grandfather. The stories get passed down, along with the keys. He led her through rows of weathered headstones to a section cordoned off by a low iron fence. 7 identical marble headstones stood in a perfect semicircle, the Vexley plot. They were exhumed from here? Eleanor asked, photographing the immaculate graves, and reburied after inspection. Town council insisted. James knelt by the smallest grave, Timothy Vexley, age 6, and brushed away some leaves. But something happened during the reburial. One of the workers fell ill, started speaking in a language nobody recognized, died 3 days later. The same symptoms the doctor described in 1879, Eleanor murmured. Exactly. James stood, brushing dirt from his knees. About the book. It's called The Shepherd's Account. Thaddeus Vexley kept a record of everything. His experiments, his communications, the rituals. Communications with whom? James's expression darkened. That's the question, isn't it? Some say he found something in the old copper mine up in the hills, something that had been buried for centuries, something that offered knowledge in exchange for devotion. Where is this book now? Nobody knows for certain. After the exhumation, people started looking for answers. The old Vexley house had been abandoned since 1879. No one would live there. A group from the Historical Society went through it in '73. They found a hidden room in the cellar. The book was mentioned in their report, but by the time the county authorities arrived, the room was empty and 3 of the society members had vanished. Eleanor felt a familiar thrill, the one that always came when a story started to take shape. And the house, is it still standing? Burned down in '74. Officially, faulty wiring. Unofficially, he shrugged. But the foundation's still there. And the cellar. As they talked, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. James noticed it and tensed. "We should go. It'll be dark soon." As they hurried back through the cemetery, Eleanor's foot caught on something protruding from the ground. She stumbled, catching herself on a headstone. Looking down, she saw a small metal box, partially unearthed by recent rains. Before James could stop her, she'd pulled it free. The tin box was sealed with wax, a symbol pressed into it that Eleanor didn't recognize, a shepherd's crook crossed with what looked like a key. "Put it back," James whispered, his face pale. "Eleanor, put it back now." But it was too late. The box was already in her hands, and the sun was touching the horizon. In the distance, the church bell began to toll. The boarding house felt like a fortress as night fell over Blackwood. Martha Caldwell moved through the halls with practiced efficiency, checking locks, drawing curtains, and placing what looked like small bundles of herbs on each windowsill. Eleanor sat cross-legged on her bed, the metal box before her, still sealed with its strange waxen symbol. James had refused to let her open it in the cemetery, insisting they return to town before sunset. They'd parted at the boarding house steps. His final words a warning, "Don't break the seal after dark." But curiosity had always been Eleanor's driving force. The journalist in her couldn't leave a mystery unopened, especially one that might contain a piece of the Vexley puzzle. She examined the box carefully. It was made of tin, roughly the size of a cigar box, and had clearly been buried for decades. The wax seal remained intact, the symbol pressed into it still sharp, a shepherd's crook crossed with an ornate key. "The shepherd's account," she murmured, recalling James's words about Thaddeus Vexley's journal. From downstairs came the sound of Martha's nightly ritual, the front door being bolted, followed by a murmured prayer that Eleanor couldn't quite make out. The town was battening down for another night of what they called the storm. Eleanor glanced at her window. The cemetery was visible on the distant hill, the white marble of the Vexley headstones catching the last light of day. As darkness fell, she thought she saw movement among the graves, a flicker of something pale, like a dress or shroud, disappearing behind a mausoleum. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Don't open it. Coming tomorrow morning. Wait." Eleanor set the phone aside. The box seemed to grow heavier in her hands, the wax seal almost warm to the touch. Professional curiosity warred with the growing unease that had settled over her since arriving in Blackwood. A sudden scratching at her window made her jump. "A tree branch," she told herself, though she knew there were no trees close enough to touch the second-story window. The scratching came again, more insistent. Eleanor froze, staring at the curtained window. A shadow passed across it, too solid to be a branch, too deliberate to be the wind. Her hands trembling slightly, Eleanor reached for the small pocket knife she kept with her research tools. The wax seal broke with a sound like a sigh, releasing a scent of copper and something older, earthier. Inside the box lay a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. A folded piece of paper sat atop it, newer, crisp white stationery with the letterhead of the Blackwood Historical Society, dated October 17th, 1973. We found it. The shepherd's account, just as the rumors claimed. Thaddeus Vexley's record of contact with what he called the shepherds of the deep earth. The rituals are explicit, the sacrifices documented in detail, the rewards promised. God help us, we tried the simplest one. Just words, Vexley wrote, just an invitation. But something answered. Something is in the house with us now, moving in the walls, speaking through the pipes. If you're reading this, we're already gone. Burn the book, fill in the cellar. Let the Vexleys keep their secrets buried. Margaret Harlow, Blackwood Historical Society. The scratching at the window stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and loud. With shaking hands, she opened the journal. The first pages contained what appeared to be normal entries. Accounts of Thaddeus Vexley's arrival in Blackwood, his marriage to Constance, the birth of their children. His handwriting was precise, educated, the ink faded but legible. Then, dated June 12, 1867, found something remarkable in the old copper mine today. A chamber, clearly artificial, yet of no construction method I recognize. The symbols carved into the walls resemble no language known to me, yet I find I can understand their meaning when I trace them with my fingers. They speak of shepherds who guide worthy souls to knowledge beyond mortal understanding. The entries that followed documented Vexley's growing obsession with the shepherds and their teachings. He described rituals performed in secret, first alone in the mine, then later with his family in their cellar. October 30th, 1878. The children have begun to hear them too. Constance resists, but she will understand in time. Mother has embraced their wisdom completely. She speaks in their tongue now more often than English. The shepherds promise knowledge, power, and life beyond the constraints of mortal flesh. All they ask in return is devotion and the occasional vessel. Eleanor turned the page and found detailed drawings of symbols similar to the one on the wax seal, accompanied by what appeared to be instructions for rituals. Some pages were stained with brownish marks that Eleanor suspected were blood. The final entry, dated February 18, 1879, sent a chill through her. The time has come. The shepherds have taught us how to shed these inadequate forms. Tonight, we transcend. The vessels are prepared. The doors will open. We will walk between worlds, no longer bound by death or life, until the day the shepherds call us to final service. To those who might follow our path, speak our names under moonlight, trace the shepherd's crook in soil from our resting place, and we will come to guide you. The journal ended there, the remaining pages blank. As Eleanor closed the book, the lights in the boarding house flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, she heard Martha Caldwell cry out from downstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Eleanor fumbled for her phone, activating its flashlight. The beam caught something moving across her ceiling, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, flowing like liquid against the laws of physics. A voice spoke from the darkness, not in the room, but somehow inside her head. A child's voice, but wrong, like multiple voices layered together. You called us with the book. You broke the seal. Now we can come inside. The scratching at the window resumed, more frantic now. Eleanor directed her phone's light toward it and immediately wished she hadn't. Pressed against the glass was a face, or something that had once been a face. The features were blurred, as if constantly shifting, but the eyes were clear and fixed on her with hungry recognition. It was the face from the photograph, Constance Vexley, dead for nearly a century, yet somehow here. And she wasn't alone. Other faces appeared beside hers, the children, the grandmother, and finally Thaddeus himself, his expression one of terrible joy. We've been waiting for someone to find the book, the voice continued in Eleanor's mind, to open the way again. The shepherds are patient but hungry. The window began to crack under the pressure of their hands. Eleanor grabbed the journal and ran for the door, only to find it still locked from the outside. She pounded on it, screaming for Martha, for anyone. The names! Martha's voice came from the other side, shaking with fear. Don't say their names! The window shattered inward, sending glass shards across the room. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. Eleanor pressed herself against the door as a pale hand reached through the broken window, elongated fingers, too many joints, skin like parchment. "Let us in, Eleanor," the voice whispered. "Let us show you what the shepherds taught us. Let us make you a vessel." The door behind her suddenly opened, causing her to fall backward into the hallway. Martha stood there, a shotgun in her trembling hands, her eyes wide with terror. "The cellar!" she gasped. "We have to get to the cellar." As they ran down the stairs, Eleanor heard movement behind them, not footsteps, but a liquid sliding sound, like something flowing down the walls. The shadows in the corners of the boarding house seemed to deepen and shift, reaching toward them as they passed. Martha led her to a heavy door beneath the stairs, pulling it open to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. "The old houses in Blackwood all have sanctified cellars," she explained as they hurried down. "Places to hide when they walk." The cellar was small but fortified, walls lined with shelves of preserved food, emergency supplies, and most notably, religious symbols from multiple faiths. Martha secured the door behind them with 3 heavy bolts and a bar. "They've never broken through a cellar door," she said, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. "Not yet." "What are they?" Eleanor asked, clutching the journal to her chest. "What did Vexley do?" "Made a deal with something that should have stayed buried," Martha replied, lighting oil lamps that cast a warm glow around the space. "Something that offered a kind of immortality, not life exactly, not death either." Above them, they could hear movement throughout the house, doors opening, furniture being overturned, glass breaking. "They're looking for the book," Martha whispered. "They always are. The Historical Society found it, opened it, and 3 of them disappeared. The 4th, Margaret Harlow, made it to my mother's house, told her everything before she..." Martha swallowed hard. "Before she turned." "Turned?" "Started speaking their language. Started changing." By morning, she was gone, but not dead. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, people see her walking with the Vexleys. Eleanor opened the journal again, flipping through its pages with new urgency. There must be something in here, some way to stop them. The only one who might know is James Porter. His family has been fighting them for generations. The Porters and the Harkers. A sudden silence fell above them. The movement stopped. For a moment, Eleanor dared to hope they had given up. Then came a new sound, a slow, deliberate scratching directly above the cellar door. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as something heavy dragged itself across the floor above. "Eleanor!" the voice called, now audible to both women. "The shepherds are waiting! They've been waiting so long!" Martha raised her shotgun toward the ceiling. "Salt rounds," she explained grimly. "Slows them down, but doesn't stop them. Nothing stops them." The scratching moved to the cellar door, testing its strength. The heavy wood creaked but held. "We have the boy," the voice continued. "The Porter boy. He tried to warn you, but now he'll join us. Unless you open the door. Unless you give us the book." Eleanor and Martha exchanged horrified glances. "They're lying," Martha insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. "They can't take someone who knows the protections." From beyond the door came a new voice, James, his words strained and frightened. "Eleanor, don't open the door. Whatever they say, don't..." His voice cut off in a choked cry. Eleanor felt sick with guilt. James had tried to warn her not to open the box, and now he was paying the price for her curiosity. The journal in her hands suddenly felt heavier, its secrets more terrible. As the Vexleys continued their assault on the cellar door, Eleanor realized with growing dread that she had unleashed something that had been contained for generations, and somewhere in these pages might be the only hope of stopping it, if they survived until dawn. Dawn broke over Blackwood, like a fever breaking, the first rays of sunlight dispersing the unnatural shadows that had filled the boarding house. The scratching at the cellar door had stopped an hour before sunrise, the voices fading into whispers and then silence. Martha, exhausted from the night's vigil, her shotgun still clutched in white-knuckled hands, nodded to Eleanor. "They're gone. For now." They emerged cautiously to find the boarding house in disarray. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, walls marked with strange symbols drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Of James Porter, there was no sign. "We need to find him," Eleanor insisted, gathering her research materials and the Vexley journal. If they've taken him, he's already gone," Martha said flatly. "Like the Historical Society members, like all the others over the years." But Eleanor refused to accept that. The journal mentions the copper mine, where Thaddeus found whatever he made contact with. The shepherds. That has to be where they take their victims. Martha's face paled. The old Blackwood mine has been sealed for decades. After the Vexley incident, the town filled the entrance with concrete. There must be another way in. The journal says Thaddeus continued to visit even after the family built their house. They spent the morning searching through the journal for clues while Martha made calls to the few townspeople she trusted. By midday, they had a location, an abandoned railway cutting that led into the hills, reportedly passing close to a secondary entrance to the mine. "I'm coming with you," Martha insisted, loading fresh salt rounds into her shotgun. "My family has been keeping watch over this town for generations. I won't stop now." The railway cutting was overgrown, nature reclaiming the tracks that had once transported copper ore from the hills. They followed it for nearly 2 miles, the autumn sun warm on their backs, belying the horrors of the previous night. Eleanor studied the journal as they walked, focusing on Thaddeus's descriptions of the mine layout. He mentions a shepherd's door marked with the crook and key symbol, says it's hidden in the north face of the second level. The mine had 3 levels, Martha explained. Most of the copper came from the second. The third was where they found whatever they found. The railway cutting deepened as they progressed, the walls rising around them until they were walking in a corridor of stone. Ahead, partially concealed by vegetation, a dark opening gaped in the rock face, a maintenance tunnel that connected to the main mine. "This is it," Martha whispered, raising her shotgun. "Stay behind me." The tunnel was narrow and damp, requiring them to proceed in single file. Their flashlight beams cut through darkness that seemed almost solid, revealing support timbers sagging with age and walls glistening with moisture. After several hundred yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, the second level of the mine. Ancient mining equipment lay abandoned, rust-covered and ghostly in their flashlight beams. The air was stale but breathable, carrying a faint metallic scent. "North face," Eleanor murmured, consulting the journal. "Look for the symbol." They searched methodically, checking every surface, every crevice. Martha's flashlight suddenly froze on a section of wall that appeared different from the rest, smoother, almost polished. "There," she breathed. Carved into the stone, nearly invisible unless viewed from the right angle, was the shepherd's crook crossed with a key, the symbol from the wax seal. Eleanor approached it cautiously, journal in hand. Thaddeus wrote that the door opens to those who know the shepherd's greeting. "Don't," Martha warned. "We're here to find James, not to open whatever door Vexley found. The journal says the chamber beyond is where they take their vessels. If James is anywhere, he's there." Eleanor ran her fingers over the symbol, feeling the stone warm beneath her touch. "The greeting is written here." She turned to a page marked with a similar symbol and began to read aloud words in a language that felt wrong in her mouth, as if her tongue was trying to form shapes it wasn't designed for. The effect was immediate. The symbol began to glow with a pale blue light, and the stone around it seemed to ripple like water. Martha raised her shotgun, backing away as the wall simply dissolved, revealing a passage beyond that couldn't possibly fit within the natural geography of the mine. The tunnel that appeared was not hewn from rock, but seemed to be formed of some smooth, organic material that glistened wetly in their flashlight beams. It descended at a steep angle, curving out of sight. "This isn't part of the original mine," Martha whispered. "This isn't human construction at all." From somewhere deep below came a sound, part voice, part movement, that echoed up the strange tunnel. Eleanor thought she recognized James's voice among the echoes, calling out in pain or fear. "We have to go down," she insisted. Martha's face was ashen, but she nodded grimly. "Stay close, and if I say run, you run. No matter what you see, no matter who you think you can save." The tunnel descended in a spiral, the walls pulsing slightly as if breathing. Their flashlights began to flicker and dim the deeper they went, the batteries draining at an impossible rate. Soon they were proceeding by the pale blue luminescence that emanated from the tunnel walls themselves. The air grew thicker, filled with a sweet coppery scent that made Eleanor's head swim. Whispers seemed to come from the walls, fragments of conversation, pleas, screams, all layered over each other like a century of recorded sound playing simultaneously. "They're all here," Martha murmured, her voice tight with horror. "Everyone they've taken. Not dead, not alive, just here." The tunnel finally opened into a vast chamber that defied all logic of the mind's structure. The ceiling arched high above them, supported by columns that resembled enormous spinal cords more than stone pillars. The floor was smooth and slightly yielding beneath their feet, like flesh rather than rock. And in the center of the chamber stood 7 stone altars arranged in a circle. On one of them lay James Porter, conscious but immobile, his eyes wide with terror. Standing around him were the Vexleys, all 7 of them, their forms more solid than they had appeared at the boarding house, yet still wrong. Their movements were too fluid, their limbs bending at impossible angles, their faces constantly shifting between human features and something else. Thaddeus Vexley stood at James's head, his hands hovering over the young man's temples. He was speaking in that same terrible language Eleanor had used to open the door, his voice resonating with unnatural harmonics. Behind the circle of altars, the chamber wall opened into what appeared to be a vast pit, its depths lost in darkness. From this pit rose tendrils of shadow that coiled and moved with deliberate intelligence. As Eleanor watched in horror, one tendril extended toward James, hovering above his chest like a serpent preparing to strike. "The journalist arrives," Thaddeus said, his voice echoing strangely in Eleanor's mind rather than her ears. "With our book, with our history, the shepherds are pleased." Martha raised her shotgun, but before she could fire, her arms were seized by invisible forces, wrenching the weapon from her grasp. It clattered to the ground several feet away. "No weapons here," Thaddeus continued, his mouth stretching into a smile too wide for his face. "This is a sacred place, the place where we were reborn." Eleanor clutched the journal tightly, her mind racing. "What are you? What did the shepherds do to you?" Thaddeus gestured toward the pit. "They showed us the way between, neither living nor dead. Neither here nor there, free from the constraints of flesh, yet able to wear it when needed." His form rippled, momentarily revealing something beneath the human appearance, a writhing mass of darkness threaded with veins of blue light. "We are their harbingers," Constance Vexley added, her voice a discordant chorus. "Their vessels, their children." James struggled against invisible bonds on the altar, his eyes finding Eleanor's. "The journal," he gasped. "The last pages, they're not empty." Thaddeus hissed, a sound like steam escaping a fissure, and one of the shadow tendrils lashed across James's mouth, silencing him. "The Porter family," Thaddeus said with contempt, "always interfering, always hiding our truths. For generations, they've kept our book from those who might join us, but no more." Eleanor quickly flipped to the back of the journal, holding it toward the eerie blue light. The pages that had appeared blank in the boarding house now revealed text, written in a different hand than Thaddeus's, the ink only visible in this strange illumination. "April 3rd, 1879. I am Jeremiah Porter, sexton of St. Bartholomew's. What I record here, I do in secret, having stolen this evil book from the Vexley house after their disappearance. The town believes them dead, but I know better. I saw them walking after dark, changed, terrible. I know what Thaddeus found in the mine. the entities he called shepherds, ancient things that feed on human potential, human futures. They offer a kind of immortality, but it is a cursed half-life. The Vexleys cannot be destroyed, but they can be bound. Their physical forms were transformed, but their essence remains tied to their earthly remains. I have sealed their empty coffins with blessed iron. I have inscribed the countersigns on their headstones, invisible to ordinary eyes, but present. So long as their graves remain intact, they cannot fully manifest in our world except after dark, and even then, they cannot enter sanctified ground or cross thresholds protected by the wards I have created. Eleanor looked up at Martha. The herbs on the windowsills? Martha nodded. Porter's remedy, we call it, been making it the same way for generations. Eleanor continued reading. Should the worst happen, should the graves be disturbed or the book reopened, there remains one recourse. The shepherds exist between worlds, reaching through from their realm to ours. The doorway Thaddeus opened can be closed, but at great cost. The ritual requires 3 elements: the book itself, blood freely given by one who has read from it, and the true names of all 7 Vexleys spoken in reverse order of their transformation. May God forgive me for preserving this knowledge rather than destroying it, but I fear a time may come when it is needed. The chamber suddenly trembled, dust and small stones raining from the ceiling. The shadow tendrils withdrew toward the pit, coiling defensively. They come, Thaddeus said, his attention diverted. The shepherds come to claim their new vessel. From the depths of the pit rose a sound, not quite a voice, not quite music, that made Eleanor's ears ache and her vision blur. The air in the chamber grew thicker, harder to breathe, as if reality itself was being compressed by something pushing through from elsewhere. "The ritual!" Eleanor gasped to Martha. "We need their true names." "The headstones," Martha replied. "The names are on the headstones, but we need the order of transformation. Who went first? Who went last?" James, still pinned to the altar but no longer silenced, called out, "The journal! February entries! Thaddeus recorded the order." Eleanor frantically flipped pages as the chamber shook more violently. The Vexleys were changing now, their human appearances melting away to reveal their true forms, twisted amalgamations of shadow and light, their limbs elongating, their faces becoming voids punctuated by points of blue fire where eyes should be. She found the entry, a simple list of names with dates beside them. Elizabeth Vexley, mother. Feb 1, Victoria Vexley, daughter, age 12. Feb 3, Timothy Vexley, son, age 6. Feb 7, William Vexley, son, age 10. Feb 10, Samuel Vexley, son, age 15. Feb 14, Constance Vexley, wife. Feb 17, Thaddeus Vexley, self. Feb 18. "Reverse order," Eleanor muttered. "Thaddeus first, then Constance." The pit pulsed with light, and something began to emerge, a vast, shapeless mass that somehow suggested a shepherd's crook in its undulating form. The Vexleys prostrated themselves before it, their bodies contorting in impossible genuflection. "The vessel is prepared," Thaddeus announced, gesturing to James. "The way is open." Eleanor knew they had seconds at most. She tore the final pages from the journal and thrust them at Martha. "Get to James. Free him if you can." While Martha circled toward the altars, Eleanor stepped forward, holding the journal high. "Thaddeus Vexley," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "I know what you are. I know what you did." The transformed Thaddeus turned toward her, his void face rippling with anger. "You know nothing, journalist. You are nothing but another vessel." "I know your true name," Eleanor continued. "I know how to end this." She began the ritual as written in Jeremiah Porter's hidden text, reciting words that felt ancient and powerful. As she spoke, she drew a small knife from her pocket, the same one she had used to break the wax seal. "Stop her," Thaddeus commanded. But as the other Vexleys moved toward Eleanor, they seemed to encounter resistance, as if the ritual words created a barrier. Eleanor continued the incantation, then pressed the knife to her palm. "Blood freely given by one who has read from the book," she declared, slicing her palm and letting the blood drip onto the journal's cover. The chamber shuddered violently. The emerging entity from the pit recoiled, its form contracting. "Now, the names!" Eleanor shouted to Martha, who had reached James and was working to free him from the altar. Eleanor took a deep breath and began. Thaddeus Vexley, Constance Vexley, Samuel Vexley, William Vexley, Timothy Vexley, Victoria Vexley, Elizabeth Vexley. With each name, the corresponding Vexley figure contorted in agony, their form becoming less substantial. The blue light emanating from the walls flickered and dimmed. "No!" Thaddeus roared, lunging toward Eleanor. "The shepherds have promised. We are eternal." But as the last name was spoken, a tremendous force seemed to pull at the Vexleys, drawing them toward the pit. The entity that had begun to emerge retreated, dragging the transformed family with it. They clawed at the chamber floor, leaving gouges in the stone as they were inexorably pulled backward. "This isn't the end," Thaddeus's voice echoed, now distant and fading. "The door is opened. Others will find it. The shepherds are patient." With a sound like air rushing to fill a vacuum, the Vexleys and the entity vanished into the pit. The blue light died completely, leaving only the feeble beams of their nearly exhausted flashlights. The chamber began to collapse around them, the organic-seeming walls contracting and crumbling. "Run!" Martha shouted, supporting James between herself and Eleanor. "The whole place is coming down!" They staggered up the spiral tunnel, which was now contracting behind them like a closing throat. The strange material of the walls crumbled to dust as they passed, erasing all evidence of the unearthly passage. They barely made it to the mine's second level before the shepherd's door sealed itself with a sound like a final exhalation, leaving only smooth rock where the symbol had been. The three of them collapsed on the mine floor, gasping for breath as dust settled around them. James was pale but alive, the marks where the shadow tendrils had touched him already fading. "It's over," Martha whispered, "after all these years." But Eleanor, still clutching the blood-stained journal, wasn't so sure. Thaddeus said the door was opened, that others would find it. James nodded weakly. "The shepherds exist outside our understanding of time. They'll wait. They'll find another Thaddeus Vexley someday. Then we make sure no one forgets what happened here," Eleanor said firmly. "No more secrets, no more whispers. The truth is the only protection." And as they made their way out of the mine into the fading afternoon light, Eleanor knew her article would be unlike anything she had ever written. Not just a historical curiosity, but a warning. Because somewhere in the hills of Pennsylvania, beneath layers of rock and earth, a door remained, not quite closed, not quite open. And beyond it, the shepherds waited, patient and hungry, for someone else to speak their names. 1 year later, the cemetery of St. Bartholomew's Church looked different in spring. Wildflowers pushed through the grass between headstones, and birds nested in the old oak that spread its branches over the eastern corner. Eleanor Hayes stood before 7 new marble headstones, each inscribed with a name, dates, and a small symbol, a cross overlaying a shepherd's crook, the sign of binding that Jeremiah Porter had created nearly a century and a half ago. "The town council finally agreed," James said, joining her at the Vexley plot. He looked healthier now, the haunted expression that had lingered in his eyes for months after their ordeal finally fading. New headstones, properly blessed, with the binding symbols visible for all to see. No more secrets. Eleanor nodded, placing a small bouquet of herbs, Porter's remedy, at the base of Thaddeus's stone. And the book? Sealed in silver, stored in the church vault, with copies of your articles and the full account of what happened last year. Future generations won't have to piece it together from rumors and folklore. Eleanor's series on the Vexley family had caused a sensation, not just in the paranormal circles where such stories usually found traction, but in mainstream historical publications. She had been careful to present the facts as they had experienced them, neither sensationalizing nor dismissing the supernatural elements. The result was a compelling historical mystery that left readers to draw their own conclusions about what had really happened in Blackwood. More importantly, it had brought attention to the town. Academics, historians, and yes, paranormal enthusiasts had begun visiting, bringing much-needed revenue to the struggling community. The boarding house, now run jointly by Martha Caldwell and James Porter, was booked solid through the summer. "Any more incidents?" Eleanor asked quietly as they walked back toward the church. James shook his head. "Not since that night. No sightings, no scratching, no voices. The town still locks up at sunset, out of habit more than necessity, but the fear is gone." Inside St. Bartholomew's, restoration work was underway, the first in decades. Scaffolding surrounded the altar, where artisans were carefully repairing Victorian-era murals that had been hidden beneath layers of whitewash. "They found something interesting yesterday," James said, leading Eleanor to a section of wall where the plaster had been removed. Beneath it was a fresco, older than the church itself, depicting 7 figures standing before a shepherd with a staff. The shepherd's face was obscured by shadow, but his staff ended in a key-like shape. "It was here all along," Eleanor murmured. "The warning. Thaddeus must have seen it when the church was built. Maybe it even led him to the mine." James traced the edge of the fresco with his finger. "We're leaving it exposed, with an explanation, part of the town's history now." As they exited the church, Eleanor noticed a group of tourists being led by Martha, who was explaining the Vexley legend with appropriate gravity. The visitors listened intently, some taking photographs of the cemetery on the hill. "Are you worried?" Eleanor asked. "About people seeking out the mine, trying to find the door?" James shook his head. "The railway cutting collapsed last winter. Natural causes, according to the Geological Survey. The mine entrance is inaccessible now. And even if someone found another way in..." He patted his pocket, where Eleanor knew he carried a small pouch of the protective herbs his family had been making for generations. "We're prepared." They walked to the edge of town, where Eleanor's car waited. Her next assignment would take her to New Orleans, investigating another historical mystery, though she doubted anything would ever match what she had experienced in Blackwood. "You'll come back?" James asked as she loaded her luggage. "For the town festival in October. Martha's planning a special exhibit on local history." Eleanor smiled. "I wouldn't miss it." As she drove away, Eleanor glanced in her rearview mirror at the town of Blackwood, peaceful in the spring sunshine. The church steeple rose above the trees, no longer an accusatory finger, but a watchful guardian. The Vexley house site had been cleared and turned into a memorial garden. The boarding house had a fresh coat of paint and a new sign. The town had embraced its dark history, and in doing so, had begun to heal. But as the road curved and Blackwood disappeared from view, Eleanor couldn't help but recall Thaddeus Vexley's final words. "The door is opened. Others will find it. The shepherds are patient." She touched the small scar on her palm, the mark from the ritual that had closed the door, at least temporarily. Sometimes, in her dreams, she still heard whispers in a language no human throat should be able to produce. Sometimes, she woke with the taste of copper in her mouth and the sensation of something watching from the shadows. The shepherds were patient indeed, and doors, once opened, were never truly closed. Eleanor turned on the radio, letting music drown out her thoughts as she drove toward her next story. But in her trunk, carefully wrapped and sealed with the same symbol Jeremiah Porter had used, was a journal. Not the original, which remained secured in Blackwood, but her own account of everything that had happened, a warning for whoever might need it next. Because somewhere in the hills of Pennsylvania, beneath a collapsed mine and layers of rock, something waited. Something that had once been the Vexley family, something that had once been human, and somewhere beyond that, in a place between places, the shepherds watched and waited for the next curious soul to speak their name. The horrific fate of the Vexley family. Their graves were found empty in 1972, concludes with Eleanor driving away from Blackwood, carrying both the knowledge of what happened and the responsibility that comes with it. The town has found a way to live with its dark history, neither denying it nor being consumed by it. The immediate threat has been contained, but the story leaves open the possibility that the shepherds, ancient entities that exist outside normal time and space, may someday find another way into our world, another family like the Vexleys to serve as their vessels. The horror lies not just in the supernatural elements, but in the very human desire for knowledge and transcendence that led Thaddeus Vexley to make his terrible bargain in the first place. A cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking power without understanding its cost.